Hey everyone, welcome to the SAT versus ACT session. I know you guys really want to know about what's happening with the new SAT, so let's get right into it. I'm Priyanka. If you've been to one of the talks before, then welcome back. And if you haven't, then prepare yourself to be bombarded with quite a lot of information about this whole process. And if you missed it, Sarah mentioned it before, that this is being recorded. It will be posted on the library's YouTube page, and at the same time, after the call, and once it's posted, everyone will be sent out the link and my contact information in case you'd like the PowerPoint. So no need to start screenshotting everything or holding out your phone and trying to take pictures. I know that's happened before, because it kind of sends everybody into a panic mode of trying to collect all the information. So just a heads up that everything will be recorded and sent to you, or with the PowerPoint, it will also be sent to you. A little bit about me. I've been doing this for about 13 years now, and that really just feels weird to say because you crossed that decade mark. But yes, I've been doing this for about 13 years. I originally started working for the Princeton Review and then transitioned on my own from test prep to college searches, essays, and ultimately every single part of the college applications process, as long as it's not financial planning or athletic admissions. Contact info is up there if you'd like it, but other than that, let's see what we're going to talk about today. Okay, now we'll go into PowerPoint mode. So first, we're going to start with the components of the college application itself, or the process, because I think that's where the first question starts off, which is what's everything that we need to know, and then what are we talking about? Then PSATs, because if we're talking about standardized testing, then PSATs play a pretty important role, particularly because there can be a little bit of misinformation surrounding the entire concept of how important is the PSAT, what's the content, etc. And then we'll dive into the SAT versus ACT breakdown by topic. So we'll talk about the new content and structure of the SAT, and then the continuous ongoing structure of the ACT. Upcoming changes, which will be inserted in between. And then, of course, how do you send your scores to universities? How do universities process this information? Do you have to send in your scores? What happens if it's test optional, and so on? And a couple of FAQs and upcoming test dates. What should you do next? And we're going to actually dive into the Blue Book app. So if you came in a little bit earlier, I kind of stopped my screen share because I needed to open that app up. Kind of forgot to. Total, I'm thinking estimated time is about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes for this presentation. And if you have questions at any point, just please post them in the chat, just so I am actually interacting and giving you the information you need while we're still on the topic. So you don't have to wait until the final FAQs or until the conclusion or anything. Just shoot your questions my way as you come up with them. Okay? All right, let's get into it. So, components of the college applications process. Now, or the application itself. First step, we have coursework. And coursework is by far the most important part of your entire college application, because ultimately college is more schooling. And how are they going to know you're not going to drop out, or that you're not going to be struggling, especially if you're away from home? So there's like a two aspect thing, right? You're away from home and learning how to be an adult and take care of yourself. And also now the academic work and your schedule has just completely changed. So how does a university know that they're going to keep you as a student? Well, they're going to check your previous records. So that's where your coursework from high school comes in. Now, within that, you have your weighted and unweighted GPA. The weighted GPA takes into account the difficulty level of a course. So getting a B in an AP class is different than getting a B in an honors class versus getting a B in a regular class. The one in getting a B in an AP class was just worth significantly more. It was harder to get that B. So university is going to factor that in. Or not even university, sorry, the GPA calculation is going to factor that in. Then we have the unweighted GPA, and the unweighted GPA does not care about the difficulty level of a course. So at that point, that it was going to say, oh, a B is a B is a B. It doesn't matter if it was significantly harder to get a B in an AP class than it was in a standard class. Now, a weighted GPA is out of a 5.0 as a perfect highest GPA you can get, and the unweighted GPA is out of a 4.0. So that's the highest that one goes. What do universities look at on your transcripts? It's going to be the higher level classes. So the harder classes, so to speak, the APs, the honors classes, the International Baccalaureate, which doesn't count for us at Reading or in Barlow because we don't have it. Any dual enrollment, so any partnerships with, let's say, UConn or NCC, and you take classes either physically at that location, so physically at NCC, or a couple of the high schools, or locally, they'll just have you fill out a form that gets you UConn credit. So Wilton High School, for example, does something like that, and so does like West Hill and Stanford and a couple others. So it's not unheard of, and that's called dual enrollment. And finally, class rank. Now, if the high school doesn't do class rank, that's not a student's problem. That's an institutional thing. So from an institutional perspective, if that's not a policy that is followed, then it doesn't matter, which actually also applies to the AP thing. That APs, particularly in Barlow, there's, I believe, only about one AP that sophomores can take, but then everything else is only for juniors and seniors. Well, that means that compared to another high school that might allow students from 9th through 12th grade actually take AP classes, those students are going to have more APs under their belt by graduation than students from, let's say, Barlow. But because this is an institutional decision, meaning it's not the student's choice, it doesn't count against the students, okay? And this is all summed up in something called the school profile, which the guidance counselors automatically attach to the students' applications, and it's sent off to university. So it's nothing that we have to worry about. Then there's the testing, SATs, ACTs. And since we're going to talk about that, I'm just going to leave it as the only mention of it here. Okay. Then we have the personal component, which will be the extracurricular activities. So the jobs, the volunteering, community service, any hobbies, those also count. Any, what am I saying? Jobs, sports, right? So basically anything that you do outside the house, outside the classroom counts. And this also includes family responsibilities. So if the teenager is, let's say, helping out, taking care of a sibling while parents are working, then that counts. If a student is, let's say, helping with an elderly relative, that also counts. So it's ultimately any part of your life that either takes up a significant amount of your time or interest that counts as your extracurricular. So I had a student who likes making fudge, and I believe we wrote that in her application. And then I've had students who enjoy reading, and we wrote that in their applications. Or some students taught themselves how to play the guitar by looking on YouTube. So they bought a guitar off of somebody locally from Facebook or from a family friend, and then they just taught themselves. Well, that's not an official, organization or anything, but you did it on your own, it still counts. Then we have the honors and achievements, and those are the academic honors and achievements. So honor roll, National Honor Society, any other honor society. Then the junior writing portfolio, the perfect score is a 6. If you get a 5.5, that counts. It's okay if it's just a project that's for the high school students and not for anyone outside of the high school. That's okay, in that no one else might know about it, but you take space in your application and other parts of your application to actually explain what it is. So that's also allowed. Of course, then we have your college essays and supplementals, and we're going to talk about all of this in next month's presentation, which is about the college applications timeline, what to do and when. So if you are interested, then please come check that one out. And finally, we have the miscellaneous. So you have the recommendations, you have the interviews, and you have demonstrated interest, okay? And of course, for this particular presentation, we're focused on the standardized testing. So let's talk about it. PSATs. It seems like everyone we have here is only a junior or a parent of a junior. So I might not need to talk about I'll talk about the 9th and 10th grade as well, in case someone has a younger sibling who might be going through that. So first up, to know about PSATs is that they differ by grade levels. So yes, let's say reading is still read the passage, or now it's going to be read the paragraph and answer the question. But then for the math, the test will only include the levels of math that the average students from that particular grade are familiar with. So if in 9th grade, most students have not yet taken Algebra 2 nationally, then the 9th grade PSAT is not going to include the math questions that consist of Algebra 2, okay? Or if the 8th graders, because some schools do PSATs in 8th grade, the 8th graders have not taken geometry yet because it's, let's say, a 9th grade subject usually, then the 8th grade PSAT is not going to include the heavier concepts of geometry that might be included in 9th grade, and so on, right? So ultimately what happens is that the closest you get to the real SAT is basically going to be the one you take in 11th grade, when at that point, it's almost expected that either everyone has already completed Algebra 2 in terms of math or is taking it currently. Now, the PSAT is scored out of a 1520 compared to the SAT, which is scored out of a 1600. Okay, so keep those in mind, because a lot of times I get parents who are like, oh, you know, they got like 900 on their PSATs and it wasn't that great. Yeah, and then I have to say, okay, but you have to add about, you know, just for a rough estimate, this is not the science of calculation, but just add extra 80 points and you'll get an estimate of how your student might do on the actual SAT if they took it today with no studying. And that will give you an idea of just how far they are from their actual goal. So where they stand in comparison, how much work they need to get done. Now, the PSAT that's in 11th grade, so for most of you parents, I think this would apply to your juniors. At this point, everyone has their scores in, but that PSAT is also called the National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test. And basically, you've been through the experience at this point. The student just goes in, takes the exam like on a normal day. Now, the only difference really is that if that student is scoring in the top like 10% within the state, then that student can qualify, not guaranteed. You simply enter the draw, so to speak, for the National Merit Scholarship. And that's when they start now checking your GPA and every other part of your high school experience. Okay. And okay, so yeah, so that's kind of how that layout goes. Now, one of the other common questions I get, because working in the test prep industry and the college industry, you get a lot of unethical behavior when it comes to what parents are told about how you should invest your time and money. Basically, should the students be studying for the PSATs? Okay, before I say it, are there any students here? Because then I don't want to. I have different responses if students are here, and I'll give the parent friendly or the student friendly one. I don't think we have students. Okay, so parents, this is for you. It's okay if they don't study for the PSAT. It doesn't count for anything. Unless you have a specific scholarship that they want to apply to, or one of those summer programs or something. So unless you have a specific program in mind, the PSA doesn't count for anything. So you can tell them that they should study and that they should go on Khan Academy and do a few problems and encourage them, but this is not something you have to actually stress about, okay? So urge them, but for your sanity, just be aware that it's okay if they don't study for the PSAT. And then, so, all right. So that's the kind of overview. Now, with that said, one of the questions I have in the chat is, how much is the PSAT scholarship? So, okay, I hope I don't mess this up. I think it's 2,500. You know what? Let me look that up and get back to you, because I don't want to give you a wrong number, and things vary, especially with the current economic status and everything. It just, everything fluctuates even just by a little bit. So I don't want to give you an inaccurate number. But let me look that up and get back to you, Iris. Okay. Any questions about the PSAT? No? Okay. All right. Now let's talk about the SAT versus ACT, and we'll get into the breakdown. So this is probably the most interesting slide in this presentation. Everything else is dry. All right. So first up, just a quick overview. Format-wise, the SAT is 100% online as of March 2024. Now, with that said, internationally, it has been online since March 2023. So they tested the actual exam internationally before they're rolling it out for us. So that's a good thing, because they kind of worked through the question sets and the technical glitches and everything. And just a heads up, I do see the question in the chat and I will address it after I'm done with this. But overall, it's been tested internationally and then it came to us. We're kind of curious to see how it plays out. ACT is still paper-based for now. They're still running a test with about 5,000 students as a sample size, just to see, just basically to test their own platforms and how this experience works out and everything. So probably not next year, but the year after, I would expect the ACT to also have an optional online up component, which that actually was supposed to happen during COVID. I believe in 2020, they declared the change. So by 2021, it was supposed to happen. And then I don't know what happened behind the scenes, but they kind of pulled that project and now we're still on paper. So just a heads up for anyone who has current middle schoolers or even ninth graders that they might have optional online for both exams at some point. Okay, structure-wise, now we just have the reading section, which is 64 minutes, and the math section, which is 70 minutes. ACT has, so they both have 4 sections. It's just SAT has double of both, double math and double reading. And then ACT has 4 different sections. So you have the English, math, reading, science. Now, timing-wise, total, so the ACT or SAT really cut down on the time at this point because it used to be a 3-hour exam and now it's a 2-hour, 15-minute exam, roughly. That's just test time. That does not include breaks. That does not include proctoring. So really, students should expect to be in that room for 3 hours, meaning if you're taking your laptop, make sure your laptop is operational for at least 3 hours, okay? ACT, it's about a 3-hour exam. And again, that's just test time, not including breaks, proctoring, anything else. All right, now let's get a little more detailed. Okay, SAT. Now, SAT, and we're going to see the questions too once we hop over to the app. So for now, you just need to know that for the SAT, what used to happen in the reading section is there used to be 5 large paragraph passages that students had to read, and then they would have 10 questions based on those passages. Now, it's every single question has its own little paragraph, and then students answer based on that. So some of those are main idea questions or context and so on, and then they actually brought back the vocab. So that's a nice little plot twist, which I will admit, when I took the SAT, they had the vocab. So we had to sit down with those 250 flashcards or 500 flashcards, depending on which prep book you got. But then when they changed the exam in 2016, they nixed the vocab and now they're bringing it back. So just a heads up, that vocab is back in action. So when you do prepare for the SAT or when your teenager prepares for the SAT, they really, really do need to be sitting down and basically upgrading their vocab. Total time for the reading, it's basically 2 32-minute modules. Okay, ACT, it's still 4 reading passages, 40 questions in 35 minutes. Overall, ACT will always have more questions than time. So it's really a time crunch exam. It's good for students who work quickly and better under pressure. English, there's no longer a separate section like there used to be. Now everything is just combined. So it's some places you'll have questions that just have certain lines in a paragraph underlined, and then students are asked to fix that grammar mistake, if there is a grammar mistake. On the ACT, 75 multiple choice questions in 45 minutes, and of course, it's the same idea, which really it's just you have passages and you have certain underlined components, then there are questions that can correspond to those underlying components, and students simply have to fix the grammar mistakes. Now, a lot of students generally don't do as well in the grammar section because now the tech fixes our grammar for us, right? There's not one thing at this point that doesn't have autocorrect anymore. There's Grammarly. A lot of students have that app installed, so all their essays pretty much get an automatic edit. We have spell check and so on. So students take a hit because 1, they stop learning grammar pretty early on now, and then 2, because everything automatically fixes it. So it's not until they get pen to paper and we realize, oh, actually they're having spelling mistakes on some common words, or they just don't know some what we might consider basic grammar rules, but they actually can't pull them together. It's a very easy section to improve upon because in this test, there's only about 14 rules that are tested. So it's really a matter of learning the rules and then practicing them. All right, moving on to math. So math, again, it's going to be 44 questions, but it's split into 2 35-minute modules. And you have multiple choice and you have fill in the blank. So it's a still mix. And topics, we have the arithmetic, mean, median, mode. We have the data analysis, algebra 1, algebra 2. Now, when we mention these maths, it's not going to be every single component you've ever learned in that topic. So geometry, you'll never see those proofs again, or you'll never see For trigonometry, you're really only going to see SOHCAHTOA, which is mentioned, usually it's taught at the end of geometry or at the very least in Algebra 2. So it's not even real in-depth trigonometry. So it's just certain concepts pulled from a variety of topics. ACT, on the other hand, 60 questions, 60, but that's all multiple choice. Now, in this case, you actually do have to know your pre-calculus. You do have to know trigonometry. And this is the trigonometry that is done in the first quarter of pre-calculus, depending on which teacher you have, but there's always, not quarter, but the first semester. There's always one semester that's dedicated just to the trig. So now you have to know the in-depth, okay? ACT, really the major difference between the two exams outside of the time crunch is going to be the math content, because you have to know more math for ACT than you do for SAT. There is no official science section for the SAT, and there never was. ACT, on the other hand, you have a separate science section, but it's really an extended reading section. So it's really just questions based on visuals, the charts, graphs, experiment descriptions, and so on. SAT just weaves all that in the reading and the math. So you still have visual-based questions, it's just not classified as a science section. Calculators permitted now with the new SAT, calculators permitted through both the entire math section. So that's a nice change. I think even if students don't end up using their calculators, it's just a sense of security that they have. And scoring. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what's considered a good score, but for now, the average is 400 to 1600 is just the range. So 400 is the equivalent of getting a 0. You'll hear students say, oh yeah, you get that for writing your name. Yeah, they got a 0. I don't know why it's not just a 0 and they call it 400, but that's what we have. 1600 is the perfect score. Average range is about 800 to 1200, and we'll even get a little more specific on that in just a bit. ACT, we have, again, lowest you could go is 1, and the highest you go is 36. Average range 20 to 22, and then as we talked about earlier, you have more time in the SAT than you do for the ACT per section, and ACT is good for students with a time crunch who would thrive under pressure. Okay, before I go into that, let me now actually take a moment to talk about this. So first, one of the questions that I have is that so going a little bit back to the PSATs, which is, would Ivy Leagues look at PSAT scores? And the answer is no, because it doesn't get submitted. So it depends on the transcripts that you have for your high school, but you usually have to pay to get your score submitted. So if you're the high school transcript, which you will, I believe Barlow gives you a copy at the end of your junior year, but if not, make sure you have a copy of your high school transcript, of your teenager's high school transcript, because you really do want to know if it's going to show. For the most part, it usually doesn't show. Then I know there's a question about prep books, and we're going to talk about that probably at the end when we talk about just what your next steps are. So we will address all that. So just hold on to that thought. Okay, any questions on, so far we've done PSAT, we've done the content of each exam. Okay, all right, then additional content. The ACT has an optional 40-minute essay, so just be aware of that. It's completely independent in its scoring, so you don't have to, it's not going to be merged with your reading score or with your grammar score or anything. There's just a separate little box for that score. And really, for any essay stuff, which now is just ACT, you have to look at I would recommend looking at the university requirements before you register yourself, because there's a different cost if you're doing it with the essay as opposed to without the essay. Okay, then a couple of key points that you need to know. We'll talk about the scoring roughly a little bit in just a sec, but ultimately what you need to know is that all the average numbers that we're about to talk about, it's pretty much getting 50% of the test correct. So when I mentioned that the average range, let's say for the SAT was between an 800 to a 1200, well, if we split the difference in about, say, 1,000, students who get in the 1,000 range pretty much got like 50 to 55% of the test correct. So in any other world, that's an F. So the strategic play is basically, as students go through their practice questions, they should first figure out how many questions they want to answer for the test for the score that they need to have. And second, they work up incrementally so that you kind of figure out where your time needs to go. You might not actually need to answer every single question correctly. Maybe there's a leeway of 5 questions or a leeway of 10 questions, and now you get strategic as to which questions you're just going to leave blank. Okay, so that's something to actually think about as you do your testing process. The other part is that there is an experimental section, the 20-minute experimental section, possibly on each exam, meaning not every run through of the exam, not every classroom is going to have the 20-minute section. So it's really just, it depends on which classroom you're in or which testing site you're in. So there is a testing, it's a section 5. So I mentioned that each of those exams has 4 sections, right? So if students see a section 5, it is not scored. Okay. And your proctor may not tell you that because the proctors may not even know that. So if there's a section 5 to the test and it's a 20-minute experimental section, all test makers are doing is they're just testing out the question sets to see if students actually find these questions too easy, which means the test makers need to make them a little bit more difficult before they add them to the real test, or if the test questions are too difficult, in which case test makers need to ease it up a little before they put them on the real test. Okay, so I recommend students do the experimental section because it gives you an insight as to what your test makers are thinking. Okay, a little bit about extended time. So first of all, if you feel that you qualify for extended time, so if you have, there's 13 different major categories, but I think the most common one that I've seen is the anxiety, ADD, or ADHD, depression. If you feel if you qualify for the 504 plan, then talk to your guidance counselor about getting one in place. It can take months to get in, so you want to get it in as soon as possible to actually benefit from it. Now, in most cases for the SAT and ACT, the accommodation that's given is time and a half. So that means for every single section, a student with extended time will get time and a half. So a 60-minute section will now be 90 minutes, okay? And this varies on an individual case-by-case basis, but for like 95% of the students, it's going to be time and a half if you have extended time. All right, next up. Okay, so what is considered a good score? Probably should have swapped those slides. I'll remember that for next time. Okay, as we talked about, now while this says 2022, it's because 2023 just ended and it's like by the school year. So this is still the most recent data we have until the new report comes out. Anyway, 2022 national scores. So again, SAT range is 400 to 1600. This is a breakdown, but in real life, there's no middle numbers. So it's always going to have a 0 at the end. So it would be like a 530 in this case and 520 here. Total rough average is about a 1050. Now, this goes from basically 1050 to, let's say, 1070. It dropped recently because of post-COVID effects, but usually it's about 1070. So not a significant drop, but a drop nonetheless. It's always within in the last, like, what, 7 years, or let's say since 2016 when the test changed, it's always been in that same range. So it's always been between like that 1050 to 1080 range. ACT goes from a 1 to a 36 as the perfect score. And again, you have each one of these sections is given a score out of 36. So these are out of 800, and then the scores are added together. Here, every single one of those components is out of 36, and then the numbers are just averaged. Now, there are no middle numbers, decimal points, so it's just a whole number, in which this case, 20. Now, what's considered above average? So above average is going to be a 1300 or above for the SAT and a 27 or above for the ACT. If you're thinking Ivy Leagues, 1450 and above for the SAT, 32 and above for the ACT. Okay, again, 1450 and above, and not just Ivy Leagues, even if you're thinking like the NYUs and so on. So that tier of universities, it's increased, particularly since everything went test optional, but it's been about 1450, and then this is about 32. Okay. All right, so now reporting scores. Any questions so far? Kind of blowing through this. Okay, let's continue. All right. One of the vocab terms you will come across as you go through this process is called superscoring. Now, when you hear that term, here's what it means. I'm going to use the SAT as an example just because there are fewer numbers, categories to account for, but the same concept applies to the ACT. Basically, what happens is if a student, in this case, has taken the SAT 3 times, then the university will take the highest of the reading, which in this case happens to be from the 3rd exam, the highest of the math, which happens to be from the 2nd exam, and combine those two numbers to give you a final and a new composite score that's higher than all your original scores. This new score is what's going to be considered for your admission. Okay. Same concept applies to the ACT, but in this case, across 4 sections instead of the original 2 that we talked about. The highest from the English, highest from math, reading, and science. It doesn't matter if you took them on different days. They'll still take the highest of whichever you have in the sections, and then you'll be given a new composite score, and that's the number that will be considered for your admission. Okay. Now, the other terms you'll come across. Score choice versus score history. So if a university claims to be score choice, and sometimes they'll just define it for you in their website instead of using the terms score choice. But if they say score choice, it basically means that you send in the SAT or ACT scores that you'd like considered, and only the ones that you'd like considered and no other ones. Meaning, if we go back to our super scoring example, when I talked about the SAT, I never mentioned test 1. That never came up. None of the numbers from test 1 are used. So if a university is score choice, you only send in scores for exams 2 and 3. They will never know you took exam number 1, right? Now, I usually joke about it and say, you could take the test 10 times and they will never know because you have to pay for your score reports to be sent. And when you are actually sending in your score reports, College Board or ACT will ask you, hey, which numbers do you want included? What test dates do you want included? So you just check off only the ones that you want. Okay. Now, flipping the script, if it's score history, which is common more for even not even all of the competitive universities, some of the competitive universities, because not even Ivy Leagues, not all of them do this, but you will come across universities that just say, you know what, just send us all your scores. We'll super score, but we still want to see all your scores. Okay, so some will do that. And at that point, just be careful as to what your scores are, because when you're really, really trying to when you have all these amazing applicants and you're really just trying to figure out a way to say no to somebody, then at that point you can start looking at the minutia. So, hey, yeah, we're not considering test 1 scores, but they were a little bit lower than what the others were. So maybe that's how we filter. So that may be a factor. Not guaranteeing it is because we don't know what happens behind the scenes, but that may be a factor. Okay. Next up, we have self-reporting versus score submission. So the other thing you should be aware of is on your college application, there is a section that will ask the students their scores. That's going to be AP scores, any SAT scores they want to submit, or ACT scores they want to submit, and a whole bunch of other exams that are available. But we primarily really look at the APs and SATs or SATs and ACTs. They sound so similar. It's almost just frothing in my mouth. But either way, so when it happens on the actual test or on the application, that's just self-reporting it. Now, because there's a cost to sending in your official report, SAT, you're sending in from College Board, and ACT, you're sending in from ACT. There's a cost to it. And because on average, students apply, it used to be 8 to 12 universities, and now it's slightly increased due to affirmative action being canceled. But let's say apply to 10 universities. Well, just sending in scores could cost you $140 or $185. Okay, so to help sort of reduce the cost of that, universities, what they've done is they'll say, hey, if you send us your scores within your application, we will trust that you're providing us with your accurate information. Then, if accepted and you decide to attend our university, then you have to send in your official report. Okay, so universities that are self-reported will accept your scores from the application. However, not every university is self-reported. So as you create your college list, just be very aware as to which universities do accept self-reported and which ones you have to send official score reports into. And you want to make sure you're aware of their deadlines, okay? These numbers are current prices, but of course, if you're looking a year from now, 2 years from now, they keep increasing every single year. So that's been interesting to look at because there was a time when this used to be $10, and even less actually, but it's been increasing every single year. Then just something to note is that not all universities require, which I think at this point everyone's familiar with because you've heard of test optional, but there are a few other words you should be aware of, or vocab words you should be aware of. Okay, first up, test blind. A test blind university will not accept any SAT or ACT score. Yes, they might see it if you send it in as part of your application, but you will never be able to send in the official score reports, okay? And even when they see it as a part of your application, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They don't care. They're looking at everything else in your application, the personal component, the miscellaneous recommendations and everything, and your GPA, but they're not looking at your standardized test score. Then we have test flexible universities. A well-known example of a test flexible university is NYU. So for a test flexible university, student is allowed to submit other scores instead of your SAT or ACT. So NYU or any other ones, usually they'll say 3 AP exam scores or 3 International Baccalaureate exam scores instead of your SAT or ACT. Now, if you're only ever applying to test flexible universities, then yeah, you may never need to take the SAT or ACT, but that's rare. So you might still want to test. And test optional. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about this. Okay, test optional. We all became familiar with this during COVID. It was a concept before, but it simply expanded during that time frame. And test optional means that you could choose to send your score in, but you don't have to. But you can. Okay. Now, some things to note here. If you're applying to sort of the top, let's say 50, 100 universities, there has been a movement back into required testing, even if it's not this year or next year. They sort of have a 1 or 2 year plan to come back, or they're basically in the observing phase where they want to see that, hey, this freshman class back during COVID that we accepted with no test score, do they actually do well in college? Or was SAT actually, or ACT, an actual indicator of student performance or blah, blah, blah in college? So they're all running their own experiments in some way, shape, and form, but a lot of them have been sort of slowly moving into the required stage. And overall, if you look at it nationally, I've come across data that said it's only about 20% of the entire universities in the country that are requiring it. But it's almost to your favor if you do send your score in, if the score makes the university look good. So let's actually take a look at something. Let's go online. I'm going to show you. I'm familiar with NYU's page. So let's just do NYU's admission stats. Notice what I entered into Google, just because this is going to be how you find out what the university's test sort of requirements or average ranges are, so you know what to aim for. Now, let's backtrack a little. Here, I clicked on the EDU. Blog posts and everything do pop up, but unfortunately, because there are over 2,000 four-year institutions in the country, a blog post is not going to be able to update these numbers every single year. Better to just go right to the source and get that information. Now, if the source doesn't have that information available, then you do the next best thing and go to the blog post, okay? All right, let's do NYU facts. This looks different for every university. I like NYU's layout because they've kind of categorized it nicely and they include a lot of information. Not every university does this. So what do you care for? Oh, wow. So first of all, it's going to be the SAT or ACT score, whichever is your exam of preference. Now, the other thing that's happened because of test optional is all these numbers blew up. Before COVID, this used to be at 1350. Now it's a 1470. Okay. Because who's going to send in their score reports, right? It's going to be the students who are really doing well on these exams. And these are expected to come down because, again, it was all overinflated. So they're expected to come down. But again, that's going to take another year or two. Actually, it's probably going to take closer to 2 years to see a significant difference. But the other thing to note is that, why did I say I recommend sending your test scores in if you can? And because this right here, your average SAT score and GPAs and such, those are factors in a university's ranking. So they're not the end all be all. But ultimately, if your numbers can make a university look good, then you want to send them in. Okay, so once again, test scores and GPAs factor into a university's national ranking. So when we hear that, oh, Harvard is like the top one in the country, or Princeton is the top one in the country, or this university is number 30th and whatever, there are about, depending on which survey you look at or which ranking system you look at, but let's say there could be 15 different categories. And one of those categories is the incoming numbers of the numbers of the incoming freshman class. So once again, if your numbers can make a university look good, that's only going to play in your favor. And then there will be other information on these academic stats, and that's up to you how much you want to look at. But my main recommendation is you should be aware of the GPA requirements, and you should be aware of the test score requirements, because those are a little bit, now you know what you need to work towards. Okay, let's move back. All right, FAQs, upcoming test dates. And then we're going to take a look at the Blue Book app, so stick around. Okay. These are the upcoming test dates, only if they apply to you. If you have a junior right now. Now, for the March, I've actually put asterisks there because for the state of Connecticut, if your teenager attends a public school, so a public high school, then there is a free SAT, in-school SAT. So you don't have to worry about the March 9th exam. There's a free one that students will be taking in March, but it's going to be in school on a normal, usually it's a Wednesday. So I just have to double check that date this year. Because what the Connecticut School Board does is they give high schools a range, and then the high schools get to pick like a date range, and then the high school picks their specific date. ACTs, as you guys can see. Now, one thing to note as you're future planning, the months will always remain the same. The dates will change, but the months will always remain the same. And the two exams will never overlap. They plan this out accordingly. So students can take both exams. Okay. What else do we have? Okay. If you have any questions, please shoot them my way, but these are just some of the common questions I get. So I'm going to go through them really quickly. How many times should we take the test? Especially if there's, let's say, a score choice and they'll never know I took the test 10 times. And I recommend 3 times. What tends to happen is that, number one, you have to study for the exams. Whichever exam you choose to take, you have to study for it. And as you do your takes and retakes, at some point, you kind of reach your peak. And after that, there's sort of that law of diminishing returns kicks in. So yes, you might, let's say, stretch this process out to 10 months or something. But you might end up doing worse on, let's say, the 5th retake than you did on your 2nd exam. Because at some point, there's just too much going on in life, extracurriculars, grades, family plans, etc., that you kind of just, there's a point when your score kind of takes a downward turn. Oh, perfect. So for Barlow, the SAT date is March 20th. Thank you, Tracy. The in-school exam is on March 20th, and it's always a Wednesday. So all students have to do is just walk in, and usually for the first 3 hours, they'll test, and then they just go back to class as normal. Okay, cost of taking exams. This is the current information. SAT is $60, and ACT is $68 if you are not doing the essay, and if you are doing the essay, then it's $93. And again, this is only for this year. That cost keeps increasing every year, so it's not set in stone. Okay. Especially if you have younger kids, just be aware of that. But fee waivers are available for anyone who qualifies. For any of these anything that we mentioned for the pricing, there are fee waivers available to anyone who qualifies. So you have to talk to your guidance counselor about getting the waiver codes and everything. Okay. What does it mean to cancel a test or be absent? Canceling a test is basically at the end of your test, the proctor will tell you, hey, if you feel like canceling the test, here's this paperwork that you need to fill out. And what that simply means is that the test company is metaphorically going to take your exam and just toss it in the trash can. So there is no record for it except for the fact that you were once registered, but universities don't see it. It's an in-house thing. I never really recommend canceling a score. I've had students do that on their own if they were applying to competitive universities and the student comes home saying, oh, I don't think this went well. Then at that point, the parents and students will just make their decision that, oh, you know what, we want to cancel this and don't want the score coming out ever. So that's up to you, but just know that the option's available and there are no refunds for canceling a score. You lost the money that you spent on it. What is a good time to start testing? I recommend studying. So let's actually go to the timeline. Okay, so timeline for juniors. Now I think we have everyone here who's already a junior, but I know some of them have younger siblings because someone posted in the chat. So for all younger siblings, ideally start test prepping before junior year. So that summer is going to be the freest you will ever be because the summer before senior year will be really busy with your college applications and essays and everything of that sort. So this is the freest you will be. So prep before junior year starts. Then you have the opportunity, like I said, the month stays the same, but the dates change. So SATs, this SAT happens the weekend before school starts. It's the last Saturday of August. It's really the only time that ever happens. Other than that, SATs are the first Saturday of whichever month. ACTs could be usually the third Saturday of whatever month they're offered. So with all of that said, even if you can test in August, you can test October, November, December, and be done before the holidays. Now I know we just said that the free exam is in March. Yes, but this is a really, I guess, bad time in terms of everything else going on to start your prep. So yes, you can prepare now for your March exam, and I recommend doing that. But then for your follow-up exams, what happens around this time frame is, yes, you'll have spring break, but AP teachers are going to start assigning a lot of work because AP exams are the first 2 weeks of May. So there's a competition for study time that happens here. Same thing happens for finals. So yes, SATs and ACTs are available in these months, but that doesn't mean they'll be your best performance. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Then the other thing to note is you can test into your senior year. So let's actually jump to that. Again, the exams are offered in the same months. You can test, I recommend, up until the month that the application is due. So if the application is due in January, great. You had all these opportunities to take your exams. If the application's, let's say, due in November, you can test, like I said, the SAT is the first Saturday of the month. So you can take that test if you have a November 2nd deadline or 15th or November 1st, November 15th deadline. You can still take that exam, but you may have to send your scores in directly, which means when you register for the test, you're offered these 4 free score report sends. Normally people leave them blank, especially if you don't know where you want to apply, then you just leave them blank. And then once you get your scores and you figure out which scores you want to send in, that's when you decide to just pay whatever fee it is and send your scores in. But if you choose this free reports option, universities will find out your scores just a couple days after you do, and there's nothing you can do about it. Okay, that's the one risk that you take when you wait until senior year or close to your application. Now, that might be different, and the university might say, oh, it's fine. You can just send us your final scores by December, like early December or something. Varies by university. It's always important to know your university's policies, but I recommend that cutoff date is just whenever the month that your application is due, just to ensure that all the paperwork is submitted on time and nothing is left out. Okay, then to continue. Should I take the exams just to see how you do? I used to say completely no, especially because of the cost. And if you're not applying to competitive universities, sure, but there are lots of free marketing options out that the test prep companies do as marketing events, free exams. So I recommend taking advantage of those. For example, the Princeton Review has SAT, ACTs online, and it's just a free thing. You sit down for the full exam. For the SAT, they even have their own entire app design that helps lock your screen and everything. ACT, they have it online as well. Then Bridgewater locally has it. So there's lots of businesses that do this as a way to get you in the door. After that, you're not obligated to use their service. So you can always just go in there, take the mock exams, see which one you do better on, which now we're kind of talking about the next steps, but see which one you do better on. And then that's the exam you prep for. So take both exams and only prep for the one you do better on. There's no university out there that only accepts one exam and not the other. So if you take the SAT, it also accepts the ACT. One of the questions that we have is how long does it usually take to get the scores back? They say about 3 weeks is really about standard, even though sometimes on their website, they'll also say 6 weeks or 7 weeks, depending on what they have going on. But really, it's about maximum 3 weeks, and it's only getting faster with the online testing for the SAT. Okay. Yeah, so my recommendation for just to see how you do is depends on which universities you're applying to, because even if you take the free March one and then you're thinking of applying to an Ivy League, well, there's always a chance they'll see your score. So do you want that score on your record, or would you rather take a free mock exam somewhere else and then work to improve your score? Okay. How long are scores valid? 5 years. So if anyone's thinking of taking a gap year, or in one of these presentations I've done before at the library in person before COVID, I had someone who wanted to do military service because that way it would allow him to do service and also it would help pay for college. He was going to do 4 years and then come back. And for him, I said, take your test in your senior year, because you don't want to come back from your service and then have to sit down and study and remember algebra 2 again or geometry again. So take your test in senior year and it'll still be valid when you come back. All right. Ideally, you want all your testing out of the way by junior year, but I wouldn't force it, because if you haven't started at this point and your first exam is going to be in March, which for most of us, that's how it's going to play out just because of this huge shift in structure, then that's okay. In that case, just play to the student's schedule. So if it looks like, okay, fine, May and June, the exam's not going to happen because AP testing and finals, okay, then maybe summer is a good time to prep. And then take the August exams, right? Okay, so we have questions about, yes, I saw the question in the chat and we're going to talk about it now. So the next steps, and we're still going to cover the app for the SAT. So just bear with me as we just round out everything. Okay, couple of resources that you have. Let's actually go online. So first up, Khan Academy. For SAT prep, College Board partnered with Khan Academy. And notice I just threw it into Google and they will find the information for me. Test prep, here's the digital SAT section. At this point, pretty much every teenager is aware of what Khan Academy is. If they go on there, there's a sort of like a tutorial, everything is kind of set up, and for educators, for parents, and then you can just do let's go. And I would probably need to sign in, but I believe, yeah, this is about as far as they might let me go. So you'll have concepts. You also have 2 full exams that you can practice with them. And these are exams that are provided by College Board. So you can go that route. And while we're on Khan Academy, please note that they should also have, they usually have PSAT something, but even if they don't have it here, you'll find it on College Board. Okay. You know what? I'll show you how to get there on College Board, because I'm sure. Then College Board, we can do PSAT. And it takes you directly to the PSATs page, and you can either explore and find your samples this way. So this Blue Book, which is the app we're actually going to take a look at in a couple seconds, a couple minutes, but so they have all the information you need for PSATs. And then if you just enter practice test, they'll actually take you to the practice test. I actually never spend that much time on a website. I just let Google do all the searches for me so that I can jump directly to the link, because navigating any website at this point is just really, really complicated digital SAT preparation. So the exams, the mock exams that you see here are the same ones on Khan Academy. Okay, that's one way to do it. The other way to take mock exams, Princeton Review, SAT Digital. And let's do free exam. Free digital SAT, it's like the first link that pops up, and that's not even because of my history. And then you just try it for free. Okay, they'll just ask you to create an account. There's no financial information placed in there or anything. Once you create an account, then you just take the test. Okay, and they've created the software very similar to what College Board is. So what the Blue Book app is. So you wouldn't be losing out on anything in your mock exam experience. So that's the SAT stuff, which this I've just shown you all the free options. ACT, once again, just like how I entered here and I said SAT, you can simply do the same thing with ACT. And this one's not digital. Well, they'll have it online, even though the exam itself is not digital. So that's up to you if you want to go to an in-person event or if you just want to do it online. So, and if you do it, you just find a practice test and you just enter your, what is this? No, test online. And that's about it. And then sometimes they'll do the all-together test, etc., or all-together session, and so on. So at this point, they're all virtual. They used to have mock exams in person for pre-COVID, but now it's all in person. Or sorry, virtual. So you can take the exam that way here too. Okay. ACT has ACT prep. Let's see what happens if I just type that in. Usually it's going to be on ACT's website and they have their own prep available as well. They have the guide and it's free. It'll give you a few mock questions, but they also have like a sort of a video course thing that they've come up with. And of course they have practice questions. Now, practice questions are really the gold that make all these exams. And at this point, I used to recommend the Princeton Review. Let's see. I'm not logged in, so we'll see what. Okay, sure. That was weird. Okay, so let's do Princeton Review. SAT. And I just say Princeton Review because their content is very, very eerily similar to what College Board produces. To the extent where the questions are pretty much, names changed around and numbers changed around, but they kept the exact same math calculation. So it's, I wouldn't say plagiarism, but I think there's a fine line that they're really, really getting close to. But it plays to the benefits of us consumers, so we keep it. Okay, so they'll have the practice question sets, because really, especially if you're working with a tutor, then what matters is, hey, if you're bad at a certain question type, you really want to know that you have enough of those practice problems to keep trying on and varying your strategy and keep trying on. So recommend basically that. Or you can always do something like the general book, but they'll have strategies and then they say 9 practice tests and like 5 of them will be online. So it's up to you. But this is one of the test companies I recommend their books for SAT or ACT. And then ACT, they also have like 1,000 question. But yes, so they'll have like 1,000 question thing. There we go, 1,500 ACT practice problems. Okay, so those are a couple of resources I recommend when it comes to your test prepping. All right, now let's take a moment and look at the Blue Book app. So this is what the Blue Book app looks like. This is the main screen. Now, because I have an educator account, I can't actually get into every single thing, which you'll still see everything. You're going to see fewer problems than the actual exam. That's the only difference. Okay, so once students register for their SAT, they will be asked to download the Blue Book app. Ideally, you want to download it at least a week before the test, just so you have time to play around with it, to get comfortable with all the buttons are, to make sure you read all the instructions in advance so that you don't have to waste time or spend time during the test reading just instructions, okay? Now, once you register for the SAT, your actual SAT is going to pop up over here. So this is the one you'll only be able to click on test day. Other than that, you can't. Then there's always going to be a practice and prepare section. and you'll have the test preview and you'll have full-length exam. So I believe I do not have access to the full-length exam. There we go, because I am an educator, but that's okay because we still have the test preview. And you'll get this assistive technology. So I don't have device lock. What's normally going to happen is once I open this app on my computer on test day, my computer locks down or my screen locks down and I cannot open any other window. Okay. Ooh, we have some registration questions. Okay. All right, let's actually do this, just a quick run through here, and then we're gonna go back and I'll show you registration information about SATs and ACTs and how to find out more about all the deadlines and scores and everything, okay? So let's take a look at the normal layout. So notice instructions here, it's simply saying, read the questions, answer, may include visuals, and choose your best answer. Okay. This is how the exam has changed. Used to be huge passages. Now it's about a sentence. Questions are based on this, and then there's a marking system. So first you always have a timer up top, and then you have strikeout options over here, so you can always cross out things. And then you have annotation features that are available as well. So but I have to highlight something. This is something I want students to really play with. We're not going to spend as much time on it as I would if we had, which is one of the reasons I was asking, oh, do we have any teenagers on the call? Because if we did, then I would want them, this is really more pertaining to them than it is for us. So you have an annotation system, okay? And let's say I wrote something, I save it. Every time I put my cursor over it, it'll show my annotation. This stuff, get to pick the right answer. Down here, I have a full layout of my questions and I can jump around as I please. So I don't have to keep scrolling, go next, 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 next. I can simply jump. And there's a marking system, so I can always mark a few questions that I want to skip and then, or that I need to review. And there's a bookmarking. There's a bookmark. Basically, right, so that will show me, or hold on, let's just, basically I can tag the questions that I want to go back to review. Okay, so ultimately this is kind of the marking system here. And then I kind of want to just quickly jump to the math section to show you blah, 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 modules over, just show me the math and then we'll wind it up. Okay, so math sections, see all of this writing, this is what students should be familiar with in advance. There's no reason to spend test time actually reading through all these instructions, okay? Then here, okay, so here's the bookmark that I was talking about, mark for review. It's right next to the question number, no matter what section you go to. Strikeout system is still the same, slight differences here. On the actual SAT before, you always had these features available, but you just had a physical calculator. Now you have an online calculator available as well. Students are allowed to take their physical calculator, and I recommend it because that's the one we're most familiar with. We're not really, they've used this calculator before for their math class, but again, depends on the teacher. It depends on if they are in that math class, if they're in pre-calculus and using this, or if they are in algebra 2 using this. But if they're not, then they might not be familiar with the online calculator. So in that case, just take your physical calculator with you. You can't really go wrong with that. Okay. And the reference box is up here as well. This was always given to you. SAT has a reference box available. ACT does not. Okay. This information was always available. It's just now simply located over here instead of on paper. That is it. Those are the major differences in the platform that they'll be using. And again, timer is always here, but I still recommend taking your own watch. Okay, so now let's close out of this. Oh, one more thing. Free response, this is what it looks like. So students just basically fill in the blank. And that shows, if I want to say that's my final answer, I just simply move on. That's it. Okay, then registration. So now let's talk about the important stuff. So everything SAT related, PSAT related, and AP related is found on College Board. Okay, SAT, AP, College Search stuff, etc. But it's all on College Board. Now, once you go on College Board, and at this point, every single student has a College Board account because they've been taking the PSATs for years. So you simply log in and register. You don't even have to log in to see all the registration information because we had it right there in the corner. And then you simply pick your registration dates. They'll tell you deadlines. Now, You always want to register, of course, by the deadline, but there's a late registration fee if you don't register by the deadline. And usually it's an extra $30. So just be aware of that. And usually the late registration is open until 2 weeks before the exam, whereas the actual registration may vary, but it used to be about a month before the test, and now there's a little bit more flexibility. Okay, so just something to be aware of. And once you log into your account, this is also where you can see all your test scores. You can take a look at all the test fees and change test centers. There's a fee, cancellation, there's a fee, late cancellation, etc., late registration. Yeah, see, so there's a $30 fee. Score reports we were talking about. So you have the $14 fee, rush is different, etc. So you have all your fee structure, everything laid out this way for SAT. ACT, and really notice I'm finding everything by just throwing it into Google. If you even threw in SAT registration into Google, it will lead you to College Board. ACT is over here, and we just have everything ACT related, including the dates, and we'll have the fee structure, test checklist, etc. Again, sometimes they don't just, here you go. So viewing, getting your scores, understanding your scores. There's no just registration button, or is that because I have too much happen? Oh, there we go. Like register for the test now. Okay, so those are the two major websites you need to be aware of for all things test related. All right, so now your next steps, now that we've talked about all of that, is really to create a list of potential universities, really, because as we talked about when we looked at the admission stats, is you need to know what the highest criteria you're aiming for is, and then work towards it. Because if you don't need to get that 1420 and you can stop testing at, let's say, 1250, why go and try and get a 1450? It's not what the university wants. So just try and get into the range and then call it a day. Move on and focus on your grades, on your extracurriculars, and other parts of your application. Determine basically what your target score is and allow for at least 3 months of prep time. And that's usually during the summer, depending on, again, how far up you need to go or what the discrepancy is between where you currently are and where you need to get. But allow for some test time. And of course, as parents, be aware of how your teen studies best. If that's alone, great. If they're going to go on Khan Academy and be proactive, or even get the study books and be proactive, great. I've had some parents who bought an online course for them, and then the student never logged in, and then they ended up getting a tutor, which was me, which is how I found out. But that's what ended up happening. So really, just please take your teen study habits into account before you make a decision on the study choices. Okay. All right. So that sums up the entire talk. If you have any questions, please let me know. This is my contact information if you want it. And other than that, I do have this is what my website looks like. It's still under construction and should be up by the end of this week. But if you are interested and want to be notified, then there is a contact form. I'll just post it in the chat. And it's just for notification purposes, nothing else. So it's not going to be used, but please let me know.